right, today is going to be part two of what's probably going to end up being a four-part series as we go through a Dynasty mock draft with Matt Lawson. If you missed last week's episode, we drafted the first 24 picks. We each took 12 and broke down those picks. It was great analysis. We flowed pretty well. I thought it was pretty enjoyable. Hopefully, it was an enjoyable listen as well, and a very informative one. And we're going to try and do the exact same thing again today with the 24 players that we picked now off the board. We'll just go through 24 more. We mentioned a few of our best available at the end of that last episode. I'm assuming some of those guys will go pretty early here in this one. And then we'll go pretty deep after that as well. Maybe we'll still give a best available at the end. I don't know. We'll see. But if we're going to keep doing this draft, then maybe we want to keep our draft boards a little bit more hidden, more secretive, even though it's not a real league, so maybe we won't. Maybe we'll give some good insights as kind of a sneak peek ahead to next week. And obviously, as I mentioned with yesterday's episode, that didn't end up even coming out until this morning, so apologies for that. It was supposed to be this episode yesterday. Due to scheduling, it's now going to be today. No worries, no problem. We're still going to keep flowing, but make sure to check out that one. I talked about the Rockets yesterday. Pretty good analysis there, I hope. And it was fun to actually talk about a team with some exciting young players. But before I bring Matt in, I just want to remind you guys that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Of course, we got all the sports going on. We got baseball season, we got the NHL playoffs. But this is an NBA podcast, so I really want to highlight the NBA playoffs as I have been doing. Nothing new. Pacers won game 4 last night. So they're up 3-1. Another team that's up 3-1 is Oklahoma City with game 5 back in OKC. They're currently favored by 8 points over Minnesota with a chance to win the series tonight. If you feel like Minnesota is going to extend the series or that OKC is going to put it away. It's a great opportunity to get in on the action at BetOnline with all the live odds. You can even wait until the game starts, kind of get a feel for things. Bet at halftime, bet in the middle of the game. You can do that. They have live betting as well. And then in between the games, there's only one game a night now. So maybe you do it before, maybe you do it after, maybe you do it in between some of the baseball games. You can head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas style games, including poker and a live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in Matt now. And we are going to resume this mock draft, which I'm going to go ahead and pull up on the screen here just so we can kind of see the last few picks from last time. If you're watching, you can kind of see. If you're listening, you'll just have to check out last week's episode. But before we start making picks and I resume this timer, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Noah. I heard from so many people in the last week saying, hey, I'm doing a Dynasty startup draft, or like I'm about to do one, and this was so helpful. Can you keep it going? Can you do, more rounds of this? Can you see what the next, few rounds of picks would look like? And that's why, we give the people what they want. We're back to be able to give them our thoughts on now the next couple rounds in a 12-team standard Dynasty startup. And I think this is where it really gets interesting because we begin to see the consensus kind of fall apart a little bit. The top 24, pretty consistent across Dynasty rankings, pretty consistent across what you're going to see in a Dynasty startup. Maybe the order changes around a little bit. But when we get into this section, you start to see strategies differ, people's opinions differ a lot. And I think that this is where you begin to see the biggest value begin to accumulate in your startup draft.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this goes. Because like you said, the top 24, it's fairly close to consensus. There's a couple guys that you're higher on or that I'm higher on. But here it's almost like the two paths diverge. And you could argue that some players go much later or much earlier based on what your team's direction ends up being in a Dynasty startup. Because you have some of these players that are going to be top 5, top 10 producers for the next 2 seasons that are also kind of in their mid-30s versus some of these players that are in their mid-20s that are either producing at a high level or we see that upside. So there's a number of different paths we can kind of take. It'll be interesting to see how some of these guys or where they go. And then there's also some of the players that are coming off pretty major injuries that may slip a little bit. Like we saw Tatum slip in the first episode of this. There's a couple other guys that may have typically gone in this range that may have been bumped out. It's going to be interesting to see how some of these guys end up getting picked.
Yeah, I think my big point of advice for Dynasty startups here would be What you do not want to do is start worrying about position, start
Mhm.
worrying about making sure that your whole team fits together, especially in categories leagues. What stats am I accumulating? You want to get value, and you don't want to reach. You want to find guys that you believe in, that you think are going to hold value, that are going to potentially increase their value going forward, and you can figure out the rest later because you're not locked into this roster. There's plenty of trading that can and should come after this draft, but your goal coming out of a dynasty startup should be, I want to accumulate the most dynasty value that I can going forward. And then you can figure out positions later. You can figure out your punt build later, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're reaching just because I need a point guard, or I really need to get some blocks here. I haven't really been doing that so far. This is not like a redraft league. There's going to be so much that's going to change year over year, even within that first season, that you want to make sure that you are doing the best job of accumulating value rather than worrying too much about making sure that your positional or category strategy is exactly perfect coming out of the draft. Does not need to be your forever team coming out of this dynasty startup.
Yeah, I'd say probably the main or arguably only time you need to truly worry about that is the trade deadline if you're planning on making a run at a championship. And that's when you maybe lean in a little bit more to a specific build or specific positions. Everything else is just value. That's all
Yep,
it ends up being.
that's
All right.
right.
We can go ahead and get into this draft. I will start it back up and we'll have this 2-minute timer to kind of keep us on track once again. And then actually just flipped up to show a little bit rest of the board. So if you did miss last week's episode, there it is if you're watching. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off by drafting a younger point guard who I think was a little bit higher up on a consensus dynasty draft board over the past couple of seasons. He's kind of, yes, moved a little bit further down recently, but I'm still very high on him. Still love his upside, and I think so I'll just go ahead and say the name. It's Darius Garland. I'm going to give the timer a little bit of time to tick down so I can continue to talk about it so it doesn't take away from your pick too much. But I think Darius Garland still has all the talent in the world that we expected him to eventually develop into. We've seen it in flashes. It hasn't been the most flawless fit for his statistical, I guess, production alongside Donovan Mitchell with Jared Allen, Evan Mobley there as well. It's just a lot of different moving parts. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell is the key piece of the offense, so it's kind of limited Darius Garland at time. But if we look back at what he did the year before, Donovan Mitchell was there, and we see that level of production and understand that he's probably more capable of doing even more now, but just the situation has limited him a little bit. I think he's more than worth being drafted here at pick 25.
Yeah, I think this was a great bounce back season from Garland, and we saw what Garland could be before Donovan Mitchell came in. We're going to get to eventually see what Darius Garland can be after Donovan Mitchell leaves. You're going to see the assists come up, the points come up, the 3-point attempts come up. We saw some of that already this past year as Donovan Mitchell took a back seat at times. So I think he's someone who has an ability to rise above his current level, and obviously at his age, there is good reason to believe that his best years are yet to come. All right. Coming up next for me, this player is a tier above Garland for me, and it's mostly based on potential. This is someone that I think has a fantasy upside beyond what we've seen so far, even though we've seen a lot of production from him at an early stage in his career, and that's Paolo Banchero. Banchero is a little bit divisive when it comes between categories and points formats, obviously dominant in points formats. I think a top 10 dynasty asset in points formats, but I think a top 25 dynasty asset in categories leagues as well because of where his stat set will eventually go. I think the field goal percentage is going to rise up dramatically as he moves away from kind of focusing in on his mid-range shot, getting to the rim more, using his size to be able to do that. I see that something that will grow with him over time. I think we'll continue to see improvement in his outside shooting as well, and we can see dramatic increases in his assists as he continues to develop as a playmaker, like we've seen many of these bigger on-ball power forward types develop in their game as their career goes on into their prime. You see the assist rate come up as well. So I'm going to take Banchero here on the promise of what I think will be a developing head-to-head 9-category stat set in the future, and a player who obviously has shown all-star ability. We saw that flashed again in these playoffs where he was really excellent for the Magic after some rough stretches coming back off of an injury during the season.
Yeah, I love Paolo's upside. I love the idea of what he can be. I think my fear with him, honestly, is what you mentioned about him emphasizing the mid-range shot so much. And the field goal percentage has kind of struggled because of his, I guess, dependency on this mid-range shot or his just desire to continue to shoot it. There was he had like a little back and forth with George Niang where George Niang was just like, yeah, man, just keep shooting those mid ranges, see where it gets you. And it's like he wasn't even super efficient from there this year either. So hopefully, I would love to see him just take it out of his game, or I guess minimize how much he uses it. And I think that would definitely help Paolo. And then if that happens and we see the statistical result, he'll probably shoot up draft boards here. I'm gonna go with let's see, I'm gonna go with Trey Murphy here. Um, we've seen what he can do when he has enough of a role, elite from outside, does a number of different things across the board, super young. Injuries have limited him at times, but I think that also just happens in New Orleans. Everyone seems to get hurt, but we've also seen that benefit him from injuries to other players. I'm hoping that New Orleans just sees what they have in Trey Murphy and just continue to emphasize him. Maybe not necessarily build around him, but really, I guess, feature him in the offense moving forward, even when everyone's healthy, because he's just such a talented young player with upside to be a top 10 player as he continues to develop.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Trey Murphy. I think that this year we've continued to see the uptick in his free throw rate. He continues to get to the line more. We've seen more self-creation every single year. He continues to develop more and more into what more than just a catch and shoot three-point shooter. He's really the only piece in New Orleans that I think is a long-term piece, other than maybe Herb Jones as a wing defender and complementary 3-and-D piece that you can really depend on for the future of the Pelicans roster. He's someone they should be building around. All right, coming up here next, this is where I'm going back to a player who has been higher in dynasty rankings in the past. Obviously, had a lost season this year with the Phoenix Suns, and it's Devin Booker. Booker has been a player kind of like what we talked about last time around with Karl Anthony Towns, where we need to remember what it looked like when they were in a different role. We need to remember what fantasy seasons looked like for Devin Booker when kind of the whole team was built around Devin Booker as an offensive engine, because I think that's a reality that we could be coming back to in Phoenix in short order. If Kevin Durant is traded, as many expect he might be this offseason, or at least by the trade deadline, we could see the resurgence of the Devin Booker centric Phoenix Suns coming back to the forefront. And we know what that already looks like. And this is a player who, still, since he came into the league so young, has so much of his prime left, has avoided major injury in his career. And I think there's a good reason to believe that there could be kind of like a second back half of prime renaissance for Booker, where we get him leaping back up into the second round of redraft fantasy drafts, maybe even into first round, back end first round value like he has been before. I love Booker as a piece to be able to try to get a little bit on the low right now after a disappointing season. And I think there's great things to come for him in Phoenix.
Yeah, Devin Booker is he's just uber talented. I mean, he's so I don't know what that draft board's doing, but so talented, such an incredible scorer. And we saw him kind of take on more, I guess, playmaking this year with Phoenix not having a true point guard at times, where they tried the whole Tyus Jones thing, but it didn't necessarily become a long-term solution for them. So we saw Devin Booker have an uptick in assists, but still being able to maintain the scoring. The field goal percentage went down a little bit, but super talented player. Going to see if I can repair this draft board here, but I'm going to go with Donovan Mitchell in a similar vein to Devin Booker, being a not young, but like kind of in his prime shooting guard that is able to produce across the board, high level production, is kind of featured on offense. We saw Devin Booker take a hit this past year or this past few seasons while playing alongside Kevin Durant, having to share the ball with Bradley Beal. Donovan Mitchell's still been featured pretty heavily, so the production has still been great. His production, or I guess his numbers did, I guess, kind of tick back a little bit this year from the previous season in comparison to what we saw. But I think he's still capable of elite production. We've seen it from him often, so I'm very comfortable taking Donovan Mitchell at this point.
Yeah, there was some interesting experimentation with Donovan Mitchell's role in minutes this year with Kenny Atkinson. It was definitely a scale back, and we knew that coming into the season that Atkinson was going to likely try to reduce the minutes load on his starters, and that changed a little bit as the season came to a close. You saw Mitchell's minutes start to tick back up through March and April, and as they ramped him up potentially for the playoffs, and I think that was part of the consideration there. But the reality is going to be that Donovan Mitchell is going to probably need to have that lower minutes load to be able to maintain his knees. We've seen him miss time over his career, and I think that to be able to prolong that prime, it's probably better what Atkinson is doing with him in Cleveland at this point, because I think it's going to give him a longer prime through the remainder of his 30s to be able to maintain that all-star level that he's been at. So gonna kind of continue the chain of what we've been doing here, taking kind of guards who are right in the middle of their prime. I'm gonna go with De'Aaron Fox, and I understand that there's a little bit of uncertainty right now in this moment with the Spurs both looking at an extension for Fox at the same time that they're likely to take Dylan Harper at number 2 in the NBA draft. They have Stephen Castle coming off of a Rookie of the Year campaign, looking like he's maybe gonna be playing out of position if he's gonna be playing with these 2 young guards playing at the 3. None of that should prevent you from viewing De'Aaron Fox as a very, very strong dynasty asset going forward because of what we've already seen in his career. The fact that he's avoided major injury, the fact that he continues to be able to produce regardless of the environments that he's been put in Sacramento, and is now being put in a much better winning environment for him in San Antonio that I think is going to produce incredible fantasy value along with Victor Wembanyama, even if it comes along with Dylan Harper. I'm taking De'Aaron Fox here because of the ability to be able to have a fantasy stat set that's going to be able to produce strong production in points, threes, assists, and steals without really taking much off of the table. He's stabilized himself a bit in his free throw percentage, which has been a welcome development. And I think he's someone that I view as a top 30 dynasty asset going forward with a large portion of his prime left. And I'm looking to be able to invest in that, especially as guards begin to fly off of the board at this section of a dynasty startup.
Yeah, I agree. I think De'Aaron Fox, this is a great place to take him. He was next on my board as well. I think the fact that they were totally comfortable trading or making a move to bring in De'Aaron Fox, to have him be Victor Wembanyama's point guard for the next at least 5 years, I would say, assuming they're able to figure things out with contract, nothing else comes up that would change that. He's going to thrive next to Wemby. I think it'll help him as a playmaker. But we know he can also score at will, incredibly fast player. The free throw percentage was definitely a huge improvement for him this season. Bodes well for him long term. The situation, I guess, as far as having Chris Paul still on the roster, Castle having a breakout year, I think Chris Paul will be the odd man out, and then probably adding Dylan Harper as well. I think Fox is still going to he's still going to be the best point guard on that team for at least a few more seasons, barring, I guess, Dylan Harper having a rapid development, but not too concerned there about those moves. I'm gonna go ahead and take. I'm going to go a little younger here with a player that just had a breakout season. I'm sure if you listen to any fantasy analysts, they probably spend a lot of time talking about this guy this season. That's Dyson Daniels, who I think has kind of been like an under the radar dynasty favorite for the last few seasons. Gets traded to Atlanta, enjoys a breakout season, leads the league in steals, but also shows other improvements. I think he improved on offense as a scorer. The field goal percentage went up. He's a decent playmaker. He's not going to be like a secondary playmaker behind Trae Young as Jalen Johnson's there, but he's solidified his spot as starting shooting guard of the future in Atlanta. Any improvement in his outside shot, and he could arguably go even higher in a draft like this at this point next season, because he just has that type of talent and he's still so young.
Yeah, I like Dyson Daniels a lot. I think that this is the kind of player where maybe I end up coming in a little lower than consensus just because so much of their Z-score rank that you see on a basketball monster is based on single category dominance. And that can go a long way in that category, but it doesn't drive winning in the other ones. So getting those steals, yes, I mean, it gives you a massive advantage, but you need to be able to have difference-making ability, separation ability in other categories to be a player that I want to invest a top 40 dynasty pick, or here around a top 30 dynasty pick into. So I would be a little bit more outside of the top 40 with Dyson, but he's obviously a player that I love and have been advocating for in dynasty long before his breakout season this year. And I completely get why there's the idea of growth for him, that if there's improvement in those other categories, he truly could become one of the best young players in the NBA. All right, I'm going to go next with kind of continuing the theme of my last couple picks. Another guard, another player who I think has stability of role in the middle of their prime, and we're seeing that continue in playoff basketball right now as well. That's Jalen Brunson. So Brunson is continued on from what we saw with the Julius Randle version of the Knicks, where Randle was taking some of that on-ball usage. He translated that over into the context of this season, adding in Mikal Bridges, adding in Karl Anthony Towns, and now we see Brunson doing exactly what he had been doing before. There's a stability in what we have from Brunson that I think is going to continue on going forward years on, as this Knicks team is going to stay largely what it looks like right now. They have a lot of these players under contract, and I think we're going to continue to see Brunson produce at a similar level to what we've seen over the last couple seasons from him in New York, which makes him here a strong choice in a dynasty startup, because you know exactly what you're going to be getting, and to be able to build a team that can win immediately with Brunson.
Yeah, I think stability is a great word for Jalen Brunson and what he has been producing and what he will continue to produce, at least for 3 to 4 more seasons. Because you're right, the Knicks aren't probably going to make too many changes to their roster with the way it's currently constructed. And that means Jalen Brunson is the guy. He is the featured player on offense, and he'll have the ball in his hands as much as he wants. Whether or not that works in the playoffs is up to them to figure it out. But it has resulted in a conference finals appearance this year. So he's a stud. I'm going to go with another veteran player who is 29 years old right now and is going to be very, very good in fantasy for a number of years, because I think his game's going to translate pretty well based on what he does, and that's Domantas Sabonis. Doesn't rely on a ton of athleticism, so I think he can continue to do what he's doing right now into the mid-30s at least. He has his limitations with the free throw percentage, or is not phenomenal with defensive stats. Doesn't hit a ton of threes, but the contributions in points, rebounds, and assists while maintaining an elite field goal percentage from the center position helps him fit in with a lot of different teams. And we know that he's a consistent triple-double threat, but he's also basically a lock to get a double-double every single night. And those types of things play very well in category leagues.
Yeah, I think Sabonis is, if whether it's in Sacramento or if he gets traded, you have to build your team around what Domantas Sabonis does, and that means he's going to continue to produce at a level consistent with what we've seen so far. Obviously, saw a drop in assist production when Zach LaVine came in, but I think that's something that's going to get figured out in this new season. It might not be at the same levels that it was before, but he's someone who's just is so steady in it as a producer, and I can't imagine that if anyone's going to be trading for him, if he does leave Sacramento, that it isn't going to be able to produce, be a situation where he's producing extremely similar production in that new destination. So I like him as this kind of asset in the top 35. All right. We've taken a bunch of guards recently, and there's always this spectrum in Dynasty of like guys who are going to do it right away, guys who are going to do it in the future. How do you balance production that is going to be coming in 3 years, 4 years, where before it really hits its peak versus where you have it right now? But Dylan Harper is a player that I have in the same tier with a Darius Garland, a Jalen Brunson, a De'Aaron Fox, because I have already seen enough from the pre-draft production to be able to say, this is exactly the kind of guard who ends up producing for us in fantasy at this level, where they're kind of in those first 3 rounds of redraft fantasy production in their prime. And if you have a team build that's looking to be able to pop in the next 3 years, I think that by the end of that timeline, you're going to be getting the prime of Dylan Harper. This is a big guard with the ability to be able to get to the rim at will and finish at a level at the rim that we have really not seen from many guard prospects in recent memory. He is going to be able to come into an environment like San Antonio and benefit from the structure that Victor Wembanyama creates around him to be able to operate in the pick and roll immediately. He's a high-level passer. He's a developing shooter who I believe will get to the point where he's at least on De'Aaron Fox's level as a three-point shooter, maybe inconsistent, but still being able to produce. I really like Harper, and I think he's a top 35 dynasty asset.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show that if you have a top 2 pick in this draft, you're doing pretty well. You're going to be doing pretty well in your dynasty league, considering 2 of the guys have just gone on the top 35 of our dynasty startup, with obviously Cooper Flagg being the number 1 guy and then Dylan Harper. It's a nice consolation prize if you miss out on the number 1 pick in your draft in your dynasty league. I'm gonna continue with, I guess, maybe not as young of a player because he's not a rookie, but another young player that I think has a lot of upside, that has shown it in flashes but hasn't been given the full opportunity. the way his twin brother has, and that's Asar Thompson. I think that the defensive production is elite. He's probably not the playmaker that Amen Thompson is, but he does enough other things to, I think, warrant being drafted this early. Any improvement in a jump shot to be even like just slightly below league average would be game changing for both the twins, honestly. But I think really we just need to kind of see him step into a starting role in Detroit. We saw what he did on Jalen Brunson in the first round. It wasn't perfect, but it was his first taste of playoff action in his second season in the league. And Jalen Brunson was talking about how hard it was to score on him. And specifically with the rebounds and then the steals and the blocks, I think Asar Thompson is going to be very dominant for a very long time.
I see Asar a little bit more of a top 60 dynasty asset, but the highest range of his outcomes are definitely at this level. I think the separation between him and Amen is that he's just not as strong of a rebounder as Amen. He's not as good of a playmaker as Amen. And I don't think the block production is going to be quite at the same level. It's kind of a muted version of Amen Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I think the steals can be at a really high level. He's shown his ability to be able to be effective in the dunker spot, effective in transition, effective as a cutter to be able to get points that way. And I think he has a role as a starting NBA wing because of obviously the awesome defensive potential that he has and his ability to be able to fill in the gaps as a connective piece on offense. But this is one of the harder players to be able to evaluate in a dynasty setting because the ceiling is extremely high, especially if he shoots. I mean, that I wasn't even taking into consideration. But if you do, with both of the Thompson twins, that puts them, if they ever hit that outcome, the highest end outcomes are absolutely elite. All right, next I'm going to go with another young player, same draft class, someone who we saw miss a good portion of this last season, and I think can make everyone kind of forget what we've seen from him at an early age, and that's Brandon Miller. Miller is going to at least be a top perimeter scoring option for the Charlotte Hornets, even if LaMelo Ball stays. If they move on from the LaMelo Ball experiment, if this organization with a new front office lead, a new ownership lead is going to be moving on from Ball and kind of handing the keys to Miller, that's where we can really see things go to another level. But we're already seeing elite 3-point volume, suggestive of a scoring wing who can average 25 plus points per game in the NBA. I think he's not going to hurt you anywhere else, give you solid free throw percentage production as well. This is someone that I think you can get a lot of value for right now in dynasty drafts if people have kind of just moved on to the next fun thing. But Miller, I think, is a top 35 dynasty asset.
Yeah, I was between Miller and Asar for that last pick, and I think it's definitely a great pick here. There's an argument to be made, like you said, that if LaMelo gets moved, like there's an argument to be made that Brandon Miller is the least tradable asset in Charlotte right now. And you mentioned the elite 3-point rate to start last season. The injury kind of ended any momentum for dynasty leagues, but he even had some really poor shooting nights, but he was still hitting threes at such an elite rate. I'm excited to see what he can do in a comeback season next year. I think he has so much upside. I'm going to go with a fairly safe pick here, and I think safe may even not be what you're necessarily looking for in a dynasty league, but a player that is consistently providing top 40 value, and that's Desmond Bane. He's just been hovering right around top 40 value. There may not be a tremendous amount of upside here for him to be even better, but he's been a consistently just strong producer in category leagues. In Memphis, I think his role is pretty safe. John Morant misses time, and Desmond Bane gets to take on a little bit more playmaking, but we know he's going to be consistently scoring, hitting threes, decent rebounds, decent assists. Pretty comfortable taking Desmond Bane at this range.
What I love about Bane is that regardless of what the team has asked of him to be, whether he's the number 1 option, the number 2 option, the number 3 option, he continues to give us top 40 fantasy production. And that is something that if you can bank on it and you can get that year after year, that is extremely valuable, especially in a league where we see big fluctuation in availability and production from star players. Desmond Bane, you know what you're going to get, and he's continued to produce it regardless of context. All right, we've kind of entered a new tier for me now, and Bane's part of it. These are guys who I think are, they're steady. They're not as exciting. Maybe they're not going to jump into top 20 dynasty value going forward, but they're in the midst of their primes, and you know what you're going to get from them. I'm going to take next a player that had a little bit of a rougher start. I was very encouraged by the finish to his season with the Miami Heat, and that's Bam Adebayo. Now, Bam has been someone who's kind of lived in the top, 20 to 25 of dynasty rankings through his younger years. And I think when the assist production was a little bit higher, there was a hope that there was even more from Bam that we were going to be able to get in the future. And what he settled into, especially through the back half of this past season, once he started to produce a little bit better at the rim, get back into a little bit of a steadier offensive role, is a player that you know exactly what you're going to get: solid production and field goal percentage, points, big time rebounds, and good steals. People are always going to be disappointed that they're not going to get the blocks or maybe the assists that they used to get from Bam. But this is still a really strong 9-category stat set that you can build around, and to be able to develop those other statistical areas with players that you can get later in your draft.
Yeah, Bam's just so freaking good. I think he's one of the best defensive players in the league, and unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily translate into those dominant defensive stats that we like. But he's one of the best defensive players in the league, and he's featured pretty heavily on offense. And I think the one thing that gives me confidence is that he's going to remain in Miami, because Pat Riley at 80 years old isn't going to be looking to go through any sort of rebuild. He's going to be focused on let's give Bam, let's give Tyler Hero, and let's see who else we can get in here. And I mean, I think Tyler Hero is a more movable asset than Bam for them, but I think you just definitely have Bam in there, featured heavily on offense, prioritized on defense as the kind of the anchor for the defense, but also doing a lot of different things. So yeah, I feel very good about taking Bam at this point. I'm going to take the first player in this draft that's coming from the 2024 rookie class, as another big man that excels. And I think one of the strong points for him being drafted was his ability to switch on the perimeter and to guard on the perimeter in a way that Bam Adebayo does. And that's Alex Sarr, who had mixed results in a rookie year. But I think the idea was that he wasn't going to come in and be super, super dominant. But we saw him progress as the year went on, have some really solid scoring nights, some ability to space the floor. I think pretty quickly we were able to see that. Or I guess for it to all happen in year one, the rebounds a little bit better than maybe we were expecting. Defensive stats there as well. I really like Alex Sarr. He was one of my favorite players from this past class, and I'm still very high on him. He's still super young. Excited to see what he can do moving forward.
Sarr's one of the more difficult players for me to rank at this point, because he was so raw in this season, basically lacking any ability on the interior offensively, really struggled to be able to find an offensive role. The rebounding was solid, but underwhelming for what you want from a player of his size. The block production is really where you have to hang your hat if you're viewing him as someone who's going to be this level of fantasy player, that you think he's going to be a top 40 guy going forward. And the defensive metrics hated him, but the defensive contact Washington could have made that difficult. There's obviously flashes of his ability to be able to switch on the perimeter, to be able to be that rim protecting big who can switch a little bit. I get the theory, but in practice, it looked like it was years away. So he easily could reach this level, or these could be the indications of a bust. And I think that's what makes it so difficult. I lean more toward this is a guy who could end up being a starter, but maybe not a star in the league, and have him more around number 70. But I could easily see someone who views this as just the beginning of a high potential future all-star player, and he's going to have that opportunity in Washington. We know that for sure. I'm going to go back to the well in Miami, a player who improved their offensive efficiency this year, and I think has developed into such an efficient scorer that the defensive deficiencies that have always kind of been in the background with why we think they can't have a consistent prime is why they've been held back in dynasty rankings. But I'm going to take Tyler Hero here, who had an elite mid-range shooting season, another elite three-point shooting season, finished at the rim better than he ever had in his career, and I think showed some improvement defensively this year as well, along with more self-creation in the shots that he was able to put up once Jimmy Butler was gone. This was, it was a little bit of a roller coaster season. Started extremely well, had a little bit of a dip, finished better. I think Tyler Hero is someone, whether it's in Miami or elsewhere, is going to continue to be a big fantasy producer, and someone that I'm willing to take in the top 50 of dynasty drafts, because the offensive efficiency and the shooting is going to continue to make him a big minute starter going forward.
Yeah, I really enjoyed what Tyler Hero did this season, specifically on the offensive end, seeing him progress the way he did versus All-Star season. Totally fine taking him here. I think he definitely was a little lower in rankings prior to this season, just because there was questions about could he actually be the guy on, I guess, a playoff team? And I still do have those questions, but seeing him perform the way he did this year, fantasy basketball is played during the regular season. It's not played during the playoffs, so fine by me. If He's not necessarily a guy that is a 16 game player. He's more of an 82 game player, even though we've seen him have really good stretches in the playoffs, but maybe not as the number one guy. Um, this next pick for me, I think I'm going to go with Jamal Murray for this next one. He's 28 years old. We saw him have one of the better statistical seasons of his career. We also saw him play 65 games, which I think was pretty encouraging considering some of the injury issues that he's had in recent seasons. 65 games this year, 59 the year before, 65 before that. Well, the last 2 years, the numbers have been excellent in 9-cat leagues. He's shooting at a higher percentage, still giving you decent rebounds, decent assists, a steal, 2 threes. I think he's just kind of going to continue to be a productive top 30 level player, top 40 level player in 9-cat leagues for like another 5 seasons. Hopefully he's able to continue with, I guess, having healthy seasons the way he has the last couple of years.
Yeah, Murray would have been the next guy for me as well. I think that we saw this season more availability, really came on strong in the second half, which has become a theme of his career. Get ready. If you want to acquire Jamal Murray, just wait for him to struggle at the beginning of a season. And, once his all-star contention is out of the way and he's not going to make an all-star game, then he turns it on. And you're going to be able to get a strong second half from him. That's the point to acquire him. We've seen it season after season. All right. Got a couple more players in this tier. I'm going to take one who I think this year showed a different role that he can take on in the NBA that is going to improve his fantasy value, improve his longevity, and maybe give him new life on another team going forward. And that's Austin Reeves. Reeves played more point guard this year. He showed an ability to be a point guard this year. And I think that is going to be what his role in the NBA is going to be as his prime continues. At only 27 years old, yeah, he hasn't been in the league that long. He's a little bit older for someone who's only at this stage of his career, but there's a lot of his prime left. And he showed that this season with a big leap forward in his playmaking ability, also increasing his 3-point volume. These are all things that we needed to be able to see from Austin Reeves. We knew that the scoring ability was there, that the creation ability was there, but he evolved his game even further. It might not be in Los Angeles. This might be the piece that they move on from to be able to create a team that works better around Luka and LeBron in the next couple of seasons. But I think that any team that acquires Austin Reeves is going to be able to look to take advantage of that ability to be able to play point guard, to be able to play make. And that's why I'm going to take Reeves right at this point of our startup draft.
Yeah, he's just continuing to get better every single season. And not only did he take a leap this past season, but the numbers were even better after they traded for Luka, which was pretty surprising to me, that he was able to even average more points per game after they also are introducing Luka Doncic and still have LeBron James there. He wasn't phenomenal in the playoffs. And I think that is the reason that there may be question marks about whether he remains in Los Angeles or he gets shipped out. But I think also playing against the Minnesota defense that is as good as they are, maybe that's part of the reason for that. You can just kind of chalk it up to having Jade McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, etc., defending him. But it'll be interesting to see because I don't know who that potential center could be or that other piece could be, but I think Reeves is definitely their most valuable trade asset. But a lot of these guys that could be available, I would value Reeves higher. So it'll be interesting to see what the Lakers do with him, because if they do keep him, I think he'll still be incredibly valuable. I'm going to go with a fairly young player who's had a good bit of an injury history already to this point, or reasons that have kept him off the floor, and that's Ja Morant, who is better in points leagues. We've talked about a couple guys already that are like that, better in points leagues, has his limitations in category leagues. The field goal percentage had one season where it was insane, but for the most part, isn't phenomenal, not a great free throw shooter. Turnovers aren't ideal, not phenomenal defensive numbers, but again, the points, rebounds, assist combination, I think, is fairly unique. Only a handful of players can match what he does. Injuries are also a little bit of a question mark that have probably bumped him down, and you could argue would bump him down even further past this, but I think he's just too talented. And I think, or I'm hoping, that the head coaching change will prioritize him on offense, put him in more pick and roll situations. That was part of his frustration that led to Taylor Jenkins getting fired.
Yeah, with Morant, I think the difficulty just is, how many minutes are we going to be getting from him? How many games are we going to be getting from him? And it's hard to be able to tell at this point, but the potential is there. We've seen it before. And, with some of these guys, it's like, well, can they reach a level? We've seen him at the level before. And that does give you a little bit more confidence that a guy can get back to it. And I think that that's definitely a place in a startup draft where you need to consider Morant at this point. All right. I think sometimes we need to look to where things are headed instead of where they've been. And this producer, this player has been a fantasy producer that I think struggled a little bit last year. And part of that we found out was because of injury. I think that there's going to be a big opportunity in this upcoming season, and that's for Jaylen Brown. Brown is going to be coming into the season as obviously the offensive engine of this Boston Celtics team with Jason Tatum out. I think that we're maybe going to see the opportunity for his best NBA season coming up with the Boston Celtics, who I think are going to try to contend and keep the ship afloat through this season. I don't think I would not expect them to pull the ripcord, start making players unavailable, just trying to see if they can, play that game. There's no reason for them to do that when they're going to be dangling the opportunity for Jason Tatum to come back late in the season. I don't know if he will. I don't actually think that that's the right choice to do, but I think they're going to at least try to motivate Tatum in his rehabilitation with the idea that maybe he can come back for a playoff run. And that's going to, if there is going to be a playoff run for the Boston Celtics, it's going to be driven by Brown, who through his career has shown himself to be a really steady producer in points, and it gives you solid assist and steal production as well. I think that this is going to be a really good season for him, and I'd be willing to look at him at this point in a dynasty startup.
Yeah, I think we talked about last week with Tatum's value decreasing a little bit from the injury. And I don't think that one season of increased production should, move Jaylen Brown 20, 30 spots up your rankings, but it definitely is a factor here that you have to consider is that Jaylen Brown, one, is an incredibly talented player that you have no problem taking this early in the Dynasty League, but two, he's going to be even better next season. He's going to see his numbers improve, and that is going to be valuable. He's going to be even better than we've ever seen probably. And maybe depending on how your team is, you are able to cash in at a trade deadline in your first year. You draft Jaylen Brown with the idea that his value is going to be very, very high at your trade deadline in your first season. So whether you want to enjoy that production for the entire season or you're just looking to trade him at that point, either way, it works pretty well. I'm going to go back to the center position, draft a guy 29 years old that's having success in the postseason, has a dynamic game, has been a dynamic center in fantasy basketball for a long time. I think almost gets a little undervalued now just because of some of the other very unique centers that we have in fantasy, and that's Miles Turner. His combination of blocks and steals made him incredibly unique in dynasty leagues, in fantasy leagues for a very, very long time. And now that we have these 7'5" guys that are blocking 5 shots a game and hitting step back threes, I think he gets underrated at times. The rebounds aren't phenomenal, but I think taking Miles Turner inside the top 50 still makes sense to me. I think he's going to continue to be productive for at least a few more seasons, and in a way that's very unique, fits in well with certain builds in 9-cat leagues.
Yeah, I mean, the big appeal with Turner obviously is that you can get elite block production without taking a big hit to your free throw percentage, which outside of a few players in the NBA is very difficult to be able to do. Everyone's always going to get frustrated that a center isn't going to rebound, and unfortunately, that's just not something that he's going to bring to the table. But his 3-point shooting has leveled up. I would expect that to continue and to extend his prime. He looks like he's going to be able to continue at this level of production for a number of years into the future. This is the part of the draft for me where the real questions are between players who are in their mid to late 30s, who were star players, where you have some young rising players that maybe people aren't expecting to go in the top 50 that I think should be valued around that range for Dynasty Startup, and some players who just have availability issues. But there's a player here that I want to be able to talk about who I think everyone is pretty much out on, or at least frustrated with, and that's Lauri Markkanen. The Utah Jazz have been messing around for a few years with Markkanen and pulling the ripcord on their seasons and getting nothing out of it. I think that the Utah Jazz are going to try to hit the accelerator this year. We'll see. Maybe they have the willingness to take one more year to try to go get AJ Devanza. Maybe they're going to try to tank again, but we've seen what that has returned for them so far. They have assets. They have the ability to be able to move forward. That might involve moving Markkanen, or it might just involve building around him. But Markkanen in the right offensive context, where he actually has someone to be able to get him the ball, is one of the best no dribble shooters, no dribble scorers in the league. He's kind of taken that mantle from Klay Thompson. Where, guys who don't need to be able to dribble the basketball to be able to get buckets. That's who Markkanen has been. I think that this past season was the product of being in a horrible offensive context, where we've seen him in a decent one be excellent in Utah, and also just the team immediately knowing that the team wasn't even trying to contend. I like his fantasy set. I think that he's going to have a big bounce back going forward with the remaining years of his prime. He'd be someone in head-to-head categories leagues that I'd be looking to be able to take in the top 50.
Yeah, I'm not super optimistic that Utah is going to be good next year. But I do think that there's definitely a path for Markkinen to be very productive, and it's through trade. I don't know why. I think Utah's kind of, I guess, missed out on their window to trade him and truly maximize his value. But I think you could look at, I saw it on Twitter, I think yesterday. It's like Aaron Gordon was traded and was huge for Denver. And then Pascal Siakam was traded and was huge for Indiana. Who's the next? I'm like tweener big that can go in and make a difference for someone else. And someone immediately said Lauri Markkinen. I think that's a great idea, is that honestly, the production from some of these other power forwards is going to result in Utah getting decent value for him in a trade, just because teams see, okay, if I get a player of this, not even necessarily archetype, but like this type of position, they can come in and make a huge difference for me, can help make a difference and help us win a championship. So we'll see if Utah even finds that that's enough of a price, because we've seen Danny Ainge back off on some ridiculous trade offers just to keep Markkinen in town. This is our last round for this episode. And I don't want to say this is like a late round flyer, like last round flyer for me, but I definitely want to make sure this guy is talked about inside the top 50. And you may be lower on him, and that's totally fine. But I'm going to go with Onyeka Okongwu here, who I see the path for him to be ranked much lower. I do. He's an undersized center, but I think what we saw with him as the starting center, next to Trae Young, we've seen him space the floor. He's now hitting threes, getting defensive stats. He averaged a double-double when he was the starting center. He's a decent passer for a big, can get you 3 assists per game. Not a terrible free throw shooter. I think he has all of the tools necessary to be really, really good in category leagues. Now we just need to see it for a full season. And I think that maybe they just will continue to rely on him. Hopefully, having Clint Capella out of the picture will help him as well.
So I released my offseason Dynasty rankings a few weeks ago, and I did have Onyeka Okongwu in my top 50, and I agree with everything that you said. I think that we saw a maturation of his game in this past season that gave me confidence that he's going to be a big minute starter going forward. Because of the versatility that has both offensively and defensively. I do think that there's a good chance that Atlanta replaces Clint Capella with another big. There might be some panic around that, but I do think that there's going to be a big role for Onyeka Okongwu, because he does have some ability to play next to another center, because he can play as the primary center in certain matchups as well. I think he's a big part of what Atlanta is going to be trying to do in this upcoming season, in a year where I think with a lot of the young talent that they have and an East that's kind of depleted, they're probably going to be trying to push in to be able to try to get a playoff spot, at least to get a better seating in the play-in. This is going to be a team that's in the mix. So with that, and with a final pick here, I'm going to take another player that I think maybe people are not considering the top 50, but that I have in the top 50, and that's Denny Avdia. Avdia put up a season from December through April this past season that rivals many of the young players that we've already drafted in this Dynasty startup. He had an awful start in October and November on a new team. Shots wouldn't fall, couldn't finish at the rim, but everything clicked after that point, and he showed an ability. Already what we knew was that he can drive to the rim at will. He's a bowling ball heading in toward the rim. He is a defensive ace who can defend the team's best perimeter player with his size, with his ability to be able to move laterally. And then he accelerated that forward this year with more self-creation and ability, and a better his highest shooting volume of the year of his career, and an ability to be able to be a kind of efficient offensive piece that we saw a little bit at the end of his time in Washington, but we saw for a much longer stretch this year in Portland. I think he's a core piece for them going forward. I think he's a top 50 Dynasty asset going forward, and many in your league probably don't see him that way yet. So if you have that opportunity to be able to acquire him, I think there's a lot of value there.
100%. I think Avdi is a guy I still had in my draft board that I was probably going to take pretty early next week if he didn't go right here. So I think it's a phenomenal pick. You mentioned the late run. I thought he was incredible down the stretch of the season. Portland has a lot of different pieces. They have to figure it out, but I think Avdi is definitely a core piece of what they can do moving forward. That's going to do it for this week of the draft. As I mentioned, I think we'll be continuing to do this for the next couple of weeks moving forward. I'll quickly just go through the picks from this week. So we started with pick 25. That was Darius Garland, and then it went Paolo Banchero, Trey Murphy, Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox, Dyson Daniels, Jalen Brunson, Domantas Sabonis, Dylan Harper, Asar Thompson, Brandon Miller, Desmond Bane, Bam Adebayo, Alex Sarr, Tyler Hero, Jamal Murray, Austin Reeves, John Morant, Jaylen Brown, Miles Turner, Lauri Markkinen, Onyeka Okongwu, and Denny Avdia. Matt, I won't ask you to reveal anybody from your draft board for next week. I know last week we weren't planning on continuing it. So we were able to talk about a few guys that we felt should have been considered there. But I do want to just say thank you again for hopping on with me.
Man, I love doing this. Can't wait to come back for a few more rounds. And I hope this is helping people as they both navigate their existing leagues and any new ones that they're starting. We want to be able to be that resource for you all. So, Noah, thanks for the opportunity to do this with you.
Absolutely. And we will be back next week, next Tuesday, I believe, to continue this draft. You can give Matt a follow on Twitter. I'm sure you are already, but if you're not, at NBA Dynasty ADP, follow me at Noah Rubin 22. Like, comment, subscribe, helps us out a ton. And we will see you next week.